months, and the Bayley is individuals from 1 month to 42 months. So a key differentiator between the two is that the Bayley ends a little bit sooner. The Bayley, though, has greater item density, and this is really key in trials when you're looking for small, kind of granular level changes. You're going to be able to detect that more with the Bayley in comparison to the Mullen, because there's more items. So there's more measurement between developmental stages, if you will, with the Bayley. So you can assess finer level skills with the Bayley, and that translates to greater sensitivity. Both are used in clinical trials. The Bayley is used more frequently, but the Mullen is definitely used, particularly in trials of individuals that have developmental disabilities. So as a general rule, I recommend both, and it depends on your trial as to which specifically we would recommend. Then I wanted to touch on the Wechsler scales. So the Wechsler scales are the most commonly used assessment scales for school-age children. They start with the WIPSI. So the WIPSI starts at age 2 years, 6 months, and they continue with different versions. So it's the WIPSI, the WISC, and then the WACE. And those are age-based versions. And they have norms from age 26 through 90, considering these three versions. If you're looking for a broad stroke measure of cognitive functioning, we typically suggest the WASI. So the WASI is also in this group of scales, but it's an abbreviated measure of intelligence. So all of these, the Wechsler scales, measure verbal and nonverbal abilities. The WIPSI and WISC also measure working memory, as well as speed of processing. All have been updated regularly with normative data. They're very current. All of the Wechsler scales require training and expertise to administer, but they can be effectively taught to clinical trials raters, and they're extremely commonly used. So a lot of your raters at sites are going to know these scales already. And they're scored based on a very traditional model of cognition that's familiar in terms of we have verbal abilities and nonverbal abilities separated out as such. Again, they're used very widely, clinically, academically, and in clinical trials. Generally speaking, the WASI is chosen as a screening measure. It is a brief IQ. So it's not chosen particularly commonly as an outcome measure, but if you're looking to screen for IQ level, the WASI is generally the go-to. So we do strongly recommend the Wechsler scales, generally speaking, when individuals are high enough functioning to come. So the next assessment I wanted to touch on was the Kabc, the Kaufman Battery. So this is another measure of cognition, and it measures cognitive constructs across different domains. So they're called simultaneous, sequential, learning, and planning. So it's structured differently than the Wechsler scales. It does have normative data from 3 to 18, and it was recently updated. One important point to consider in clinical trial use is some of the subtests from the Coffman can be quite challenging to administer and requires more training than for the Wechsler scales. And also, outside of certain indications, and particularly outside of the United States, raters will be less familiar with this scale. It's less commonly used than the Wechsler scales. And as I introduce this, I mean, I think you got a sense that the model of cognition that the Kaufman Battery uses is less common. They use what's called like a Luria model or a CHC model, not the traditional verbal versus nonverbal. So interpretation of these results is sort of less intuitive and might be less familiar. It is commonly used in certain indications, but outside of the certain indications where you see the Kabc, such as in Sanfilippo syndrome, it's less commonly used. And it is, as an overall recommendation, it's complex to administer, raters will likely be unfamiliar with it outside of the specific indications where it has a strong history. So indication, as I definitely recommend it, outside of those indications, I would use it with caution.